The morning they moved my things into the small room at the back of my own house, I stood in the doorway and said nothing. I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I have never been a woman who raises her voice. Not when my husband passed. Not when the business faced hard times. Not when my body began to slow down and remind me I was no longer young. I have always believed that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. And I have spent 71 years being very quiet. So when my son Emeka and his wife Brittany carried the last of my furniture through the hallway and stacked it into that small back room, the room that used to be the laundry area before I converted it years ago, I did not cry. I did not argue. I simply watched them move through my home with the confidence of people who had already decided it belonged to them. And I thought of a building in Johannesburg that neither of them had ever heard of. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story did not begin the morning they moved my things. It began long before that. It began the day I first believed that love was the same thing as trust. My name is Thandai Dlamini. My friends, the ones who have known me long enough to love me properly, call me Mama Rose. I have been in the United States for 42 years. I came from KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa as a young woman of 29, carrying 2 suitcases and a degree in accounting that I had worked 3 jobs to pay for. My late husband, Obiora, came before me and spent 2 years preparing the ground, working double shifts at a factory in Chicago, saving every dollar, building the foundation before he brought me over. We built our life slowly and with our hands. Obiora ran a small import business, fabrics, spices, food items from across Africa. I managed the books, then later opened a small tax preparation office that grew over the years into something I am quietly proud of. We bought our house in Evanston in 1994, a 3-bedroom brick home on a quiet street. We raised Emeka there. We planted a garden. We buried Obiora there in spirit, though his body went home to Enugu, because that was his wish. Emeka was our only child. We poured everything into him, the schools, the tutors, the opportunities, the belief that he could be anything in this country if he worked with the same discipline his father and I had brought from home. For a long time, we believed we had succeeded. He graduated with an engineering degree. He married Brittany, a sharp, ambitious woman from Atlanta. They moved to a suburb of Chicago and everything looked exactly as we had hoped. I will tell you honestly when things began to change. It was after Obiora died 4 years ago. A stroke, sudden and final. My husband of 40 years was gone in an afternoon, and the house that had always been full of his voice became the quietest place I had ever known. Emeka and Brittany began visiting more frequently after that. At first, it felt like love. They came for Sunday dinners. They called to check on me. Brittany would sometimes bring flowers. I told myself this was the family I had built, showing itself in the way families are supposed to when grief arrives. I told myself I was lucky. But grief can make a person blind to things they would otherwise see clearly. And I was blind for a long time. The idea came from Brittany first, though she presented it as Emeka's suggestion. She is good at that, presenting her ideas through other people's mouths. I noticed it early in their marriage but said nothing, because she made my son happy, and a mother's job is not to make her child choose. Mom, Emeka said one Sunday evening, about 18 months after his father died, Brittany and I have been thinking, this house is too big for one person. You're maintaining 4 bedrooms by yourself. The heating bills alone, it doesn't make sense. I nodded slowly. I said nothing. We were thinking, he continued, that maybe we could move in with you. Help with the costs. Look after the property. Make sure you're not alone. I looked at Brittany across the dinner table. She was smiling in that precise, controlled way she had. The smile that never quite reached her eyes. It would be good for all of us, she added. And honestly, we've been thinking about starting a family. A baby needs space. This house has so much of it. There it was, the baby. I had waited years to hear those words and she knew it. She had placed them in that sentence like a key into a lock. I told them I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks. And then, because I am a woman who still believed that family meant something, I said yes. Within 6 months, I understood my mistake. It began with small things. Brittany redecorated the living room without asking me. The furniture Obiora and I had brought from South Africa, the chairs my mother had chosen, disappeared one weekend while I was visiting my church friend Agnes, replaced with white minimalist pieces from a furniture store. When I asked about it, Brittany said the old furniture was damaged. Emeka said nothing. Then the kitchen. Then the master bedroom, which they had taken as their own from the very first week, without discussion, without asking. I had moved into the second bedroom willingly, not wanting to create conflict. I told myself it was just a room, but rooms have a way of shrinking, and people have a way of making you feel smaller inside them. By the end of the first year, I was eating my meals in my room more often than at the table. Brittany had begun hosting her friends in the evenings, long gatherings that filled the house with noise and left me feeling like a guest in my own walls. When I mentioned it to Emeka privately, he looked uncomfortable. "Mom, you know how Brittany is. She just has a lot of energy. Try to be flexible." Flexible, a word my son used about his mother in her own house. Then came the conversation about the renovation. "The house needs work," Brittany announced one Saturday morning. "The roof, the plumbing, the back extension. We've been getting quotes. It's going to be significant. I have savings," I said carefully. "I can contribute to repairs." "Actually," she said, sliding a folder across the table, "we were thinking of doing it properly. Full renovation. Increase the property value significantly. It would make sense for you to fund most of it, since the house is in your name." I opened the folder. The first quote was for $180,000. I looked at my son. He was looking at his phone. "Emeka," I said quietly, "what do you think?" "I think it's a good investment, Mom. The property value would go up." I closed the folder. "I need time to look at these numbers." "Of course," Brittany said, still smiling. Over the next 3 months, I contributed $140,000 toward the renovation. It came from the savings Obiora and I had built over 4 decades. Not all of it, but most of what I kept liquid in my American accounts. Brittany managed the contractors. I was told it was easier that way. I trusted them because they were my family. The renovation finished. The house looked beautiful. And then, 2 weeks after the last contractor left, Emeka sat me down and told me that the master bedroom and the main living areas were now his and Brittany's primary space. They needed the rooms for when the baby came. They had converted the old laundry room at the back into a comfortable bedroom for me. They had put a small television in it. There was good light in the morning. I stood in that doorway and I looked at the room that was now my entire world in the house I had bought 30 years ago. The house I had paid to renovate with my own savings, the house that was still legally in my name. And I thought of Johannesburg. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever stayed silent about something not because you had nothing to say, but because you were waiting for the right moment to say it? Leave a comment below and tell me. And if this story is touching something in you, take a moment to like the video. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to me. Tell me where you are watching from right now. These stories travel far, and every time I see a new place in the comments, it reminds me that none of us are truly alone in what we carry. Now, let me tell you about Johannesburg. My father, Sifo Dlamini, was a man who believed in property. He used to say, "Thandai, land does not leave you. It is people who leave." Always own something that cannot walk away. He was a school teacher in Durban who spent 30 years carefully saving and quietly buying. When he died in 2001, he left me 3 things: a small piece of land outside Durban that I sold years ago, his wristwatch which I still keep in my dresser, and a commercial building in the Braamfontein district of Johannesburg. The Johannesburg building was not glamorous. 3 floors, mixed use, ground floor retail, 2 floors of small offices. My father had bought it in the late 1980s for almost nothing, when that part of Johannesburg was still developing. By the time I inherited it, the area had transformed completely. Braamfontein had become a busy commercial and creative corridor. The building had tenants. It had income. I had never told Obiora about it directly. He knew it existed, but we agreed early that it was mine separately, a link to my father that I would manage in my own way. When Obiora died, I continued managing it through my cousin Nomvula in Johannesburg, who handled the tenants, the maintenance, the rental income. The money came in quietly every quarter. I kept it in a separate South African account that I had never linked to any of our American finances. Emeka did not know this building existed. Brittany certainly did not. And as I stood in that small back room with my furniture arranged around me like a museum of my own life, I picked up my phone and called Nomvula in Johannesburg. "Nomvula," I said quietly, "I need to know the current value of the building." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mama Rose, I have been meaning to call you. A developer has been approaching me. They want the whole building. They are offering $2.3 million American equivalent. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. Have you signed anything? I asked. No, she said. I was waiting for you. Good, I said. Keep waiting. I set the phone down and looked around my small room. The little television they had placed in the corner. The single window with the morning light. The furniture of my life compressed into this one quiet space. And I began to plan. I want to be clear about something. I did not plan revenge. I am not a woman who believes in revenge. What I planned was clarity. The kind of clarity that only arrives when you stop protecting people from the consequences of their own choices. I spent 2 weeks saying nothing and observing everything. I watched Brittany walk through my house as though she owned it. I watched Emeka let her. I watched them discuss the property value over dinner, mentioning that the renovation had added at least $200,000 to the house's worth. Their house, that is how they referred to it now. Their house. In those 2 weeks, I also made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a woman named Patricia Osei who had handled my affairs for 15 years. I told her everything, the renovation contribution, the room situation, the rental income from South Africa, all of it. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said quietly, Thandai, you have contributed $140,000 to a renovation of your own property, been moved into a single room, and your son and his wife are now occupying the primary living spaces of your home. Do you understand what this is? I told her I understood it very well. She said, good, then let's talk about what we do next. The second call was to Nomvula. I told her to continue holding the Johannesburg building, but to prepare documentation of its current value and the pending developer offer. She understood without my explaining why. The third call was to my church friend Agnes, who had known me for 25 years and who I trusted with my life. I asked her to come and stay with me for a week. I did not explain further. Agnes said, I will bring pap and chocolate and I will ask no questions. She was on my doorstep the following morning. Having Agnes in the house changed something. For the first time since Emeka and Brittany moved in, I had a witness. And somehow having someone beside me gave my spine something it had temporarily lost. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening. I had asked Emeka and Brittany to sit with me after dinner. I told them there were important financial matters I needed to discuss. Brittany came to the table with her phone in her hand, half distracted. Emeka looked cautious. I placed 3 folders on the table. The first folder, I said, contains the renovation receipts and the bank transfer records showing that $140,000 came from my personal savings account to pay for the work done on this house. I slid it toward them. The second folder contains the current property assessment showing what this house is worth today. I slid that one too. The third folder, I said, pausing, contains documentation of a commercial property I own in Johannesburg, South Africa, with a current offer from a developer of $2.3 million equivalent. The silence in the room changed quality. Brittany looked up from her phone. I have asked my attorney Patricia Osei to join us by video call, I said, and I opened my laptop. Patricia's face appeared on the screen. She greeted them calmly. Mrs. Osei, Brittany said slowly, what is this about? This is about clarifying the legal and financial situation of this household, Patricia said. Specifically, the fact that Mrs. Dlamini has contributed a substantial sum to the renovation of a property she owns, has been relocated to a single room within that property, and has now decided to make some decisions about her future. What decisions? Emeka asked. His voice was quiet. I could hear something in it that I recognized, the voice of a child who suddenly understands he has misjudged a situation. I am selling the Johannesburg building, I said. The offer is fair and the timing is right. The proceeds will be managed by Patricia in a trust I am establishing. I watched Brittany's face carefully. She was calculating. Also, I continued, I have decided that I would like to return to the master bedroom. It is my bedroom, in my house. If that is not comfortable for you, we can discuss alternative arrangements. Mom, Emeka said quietly, you're telling us you have $2 million in South Africa and you never mentioned it. I am telling you, I said gently, that I am your mother and not your financial resource. I have always kept some things for myself. Your father knew this. It was always our agreement. Brittany set her phone face down on the table. A gesture I had learned to read as her processing something she had not anticipated. You planned this, she said flatly. I responded to your choices, I replied. There is a difference. What happened next was not dramatic. Real life really is. Emeka and Brittany moved out of my house 3 weeks later. Not because I forced them, I did not. But Patricia made clear in a follow-up meeting that the $140,000 renovation contribution entitled me to certain legal protections regarding primary occupancy of my own property, and that pursuing those protections through the courts would be both time-consuming and publicly uncomfortable for all parties. More importantly, I think Emeka began to truly see what had been happening, not all at once, but in pieces, over several conversations that were painful for both of us. The Johannesburg building sold. The developer completed due diligence and the transaction closed 4 months later. Patricia established the trust as we had discussed. I will not tell you every detail of what that trust contains, because some things remain private. But I will tell you that a meaningful portion of it is designated for a scholarship fund at a school in Durban in my father's name. He would have liked that. Agnes stayed with me for the month following Emeka's departure. We ate pap and chocolate and she let me cry on the 2 or 3 evenings when the house felt too quiet and missing my son was stronger than being right. She never said I told you so. She is a good friend. Emeka called me 6 weeks after moving out. He did not apologize immediately. That took longer, and that is a conversation for another time. But he called, and he asked how I was, and he asked if he could come for Sunday dinner. I said yes, because that is what mothers do, not because we forget, but because forgiveness and trust are two different things, and we can offer one while still carefully rebuilding the other. Before we end today, I want to say something to you directly. My father Saifo used to say that land does not leave you. He was right. But he also taught me something else without meaning to. He taught me that what you build quietly, with patience and without announcement, is often the thing that saves you when everything loud falls apart. I did not hide the Johannesburg building to deceive my son. I kept it privately because my father left it to me and it was mine in a way that belonged to no one else. The people of KwaZulu-Natal have a saying, Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, a person is a person through other people. But I have learned that before you can truly show up for others, you must first make sure you have not given yourself away entirely. If someone in your life is slowly shrinking your world, taking your rooms, your voice, your choices, be very still, watch, plan, and remember that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. Now I would love to hear from you. What would you have done in my position? Was I too patient for too long? Or was my timing exactly right? Leave me a comment. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. Every name in the comments reminds me that someone out there is listening, and that is worth more to me than I can say. If this story touched you, please like the video. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe. I will be here every week with another story from a life that has been long and full and sometimes very hard. Thank you for listening to me today. Sola Kale, wherever you are.